everybody, and welcome back to Heart Breathings. You are watching video number 4 in my How to Plan and Write a Series of videos. And today we're going to be covering a really fun and interesting topic that I know a lot of you have questions on, which is how to create a series Bible. I actually have a previous video on this topic, but we are going to go much more in depth today. So I hope you're excited for this content. Just keep watching. I really am so excited to introduce you to some ideas about series Bibles. Today, what we're going to talk about is basically who needs a series Bible and why do you need one. We're going to talk about the different methods of tracking, and then we're going to go into what types of things you need to track in your series Bible and give you some tips to make your series Bible experience a better one. And then the final piece of this video is going to be a discussion on how to actually use your series Bible once you have it created. So if this is an interesting topic to you and you're grateful for this content, please go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit the notification bell so that you'll be notified when new videos come up from me. And let's dive in. Okay, so first we're going to talk about who needs a series Bible and why do you need one. This is pretty self-explanatory, but there is a lot of area covered here in terms of how complex your series Bible needs to be. If you are writing a series of books, particularly a series of fiction books, you need a series Bible. It can be something as simple as a sheet of paper or a small notebook or a simple Google Doc if you are not writing something super complex and there's not a lot of moving pieces in your series or a lot of books in your series. So for example, if you're just writing a 3-book series and you're going to be writing it very quickly, so you're not going to have a lot of information to track, and it could be a pretty simple like 1-pager type series Bible. But I find that if you're writing a longer complex series where you've got a lot of different cases or 10 different books to track, or you have a lot of different characters, you need a series Bible and it needs to be super organized. Now, every person is going to be different in terms of how much they want to put into their series Bible and how much they want to track, but there are a few things that are super important to keep in mind for when you're creating your series Bible. So we're going to go over those. But long story short, if you are writing a series, you need some kind of way to track the facts of your series, because as you're creating your world, there are lots of things that are going to change and shift, and you'll keep it in your mind that like, oh yeah, I'm pretty sure she had 2 brothers or 2 sisters. And when you actually go to edit that novel, maybe you cut that brother and you forgot about it. And now this character only has 1 sister, and you go, you finish, you publish the book. And then maybe you're working on multiple things, or maybe you had a baby, or maybe things are happening in your life and it takes you 6 months to get back to write book 2. Well, if you don't have some kind of document that says, here's the facts of the book, here are the things that actually went into the novel or the previous 5 novels, these are the story canon, then your mind is potentially going to get all jumbled up with the things you were brainstorming, the things you put in the story and cut out. It happens all the time. And in fact, my husband, who is someone who is my first reader, and he reads pretty much everything I write, but we also brainstorm a lot of things. Years down the road, since I've been working on my Shadow Demon saga for 10 years, he'll be like, well, didn't Jackson do such and such? And I'll be like, no, not in the actual books. We talked about him doing that, but it never actually made it into the books. So as writers, we have a lot of potential storylines and things in our minds. So it's important to actually keep some kind of record of what the truth of the story is. What are the facts? What actually got published in the books? Because it's too difficult. There's too much to keep track of to just expect yourself to remember every tiny little detail. If your characters go into a diner in book 1 that has blue seats with a red stripe in it, you know, when that character goes back and revisits that diner 3 books from now and 3 years from now, when you're writing it, in your head, you might be able to convince yourself that it was a black seat with a red stripe, and you'll just write it that way. And if you don't have some way of tracking or checking in on yourself, then you're going to have a lot of inconsistencies inconsistencies because you'll just write those diner chairs in as black with a red stripe. Now, maybe that kind of thing doesn't matter that much to the story, but it is actually important to your story world that things stay consistent. I know I personally have made way too many consistency errors with like simple things like eye color or not remembering that I mentioned something in a book previously, because as I was first getting started, I did not have a good series Bible. And so this is something that I really take seriously now, because it's something that it takes too much time to go back and reread 10 books or a million words worth of story world when all you really need is a document. And it does take time, and it is complex if you have a big story world, but it's very important, and it can be super helpful and save you a ton of time in the long run, especially if you're writing a big complex series. Now, when it comes to methods of creating a series Bible, this is going to be as varied as the number of writers that are out there. Everybody has their own system or their own way of tracking stuff. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some examples of series Bibles that are out there, and I'm going to tell you what I think is most important when it comes to an effective series Bible. So, one of the most effective things, or one of the most important things about a series Bible, is that it becomes easy to search. So whether you're doing it in a binder or on a web page or in some kind of software or program, it needs to be searchable. So if you're doing it on paper, have tabs or have some kind of color-coded system or dashboards or something to where you can easily say, well, here's the section where I talk about characters, or here's the section where I cover all the different places in my world. So that when you're writing and you have that story question about what color were the seats in that diner, you can just easily go to that tab, turn, and find the section. I started out in a binder like that, where I was trying to organize all of my things and handwrite them and washi tape and make them pretty. And you guys know, if you've been following me for any period of time, that I am a paper product kind of person. I mean, you can just see it all around me. I love to keep track of things on paper. But when it comes to a series Bible, this is something I demand of myself that I do digitally, because it is so much easier to just go into a web page that has a little search box and say diner. And then it pulls up every instance in your series Bible where you have mentioned that there was a diner, and it can be very easy to see and find what you need. And when it comes to doing the like nitty-gritty work of researching consistency in your story and making sure your facts are straight, having that search box where you can just go in and it pulls up every instance is magical. And I highly recommend doing it digitally, but you don't have to. Just make sure that your system is searchable in some way and it has an organization to it. Another important thing that you want to think about when you're creating your series Bible and deciding how to create it is you need to make sure that it's easy to access. So if it's a giant binder or like a series of binders, that might be something that's difficult to take with you when you go on a writing retreat or when you move. And hey, truthfully, not to be down on paper planning, because I know a lot of people use series Bibles in binders, but it's also easy to lose something like that. I mean, I have moved several times in the last couple of years. We're going to move again this year. If I had to keep track of that one series Bible or a series of binders, I would be a nervous wreck, because that's a lot of pressure to put that much time into something that can be lost either just because you misplaced it, or I have been through 2 total loss house fires, and I have lost enough stuff that way to be devastated if I lose it. So another thing to think about, but it needs to be something that's easy to carry around with you if you go writing out places, or that's easily accessible to you wherever you are. For this reason, I like to use a web-based type of tracking system. So I personally use a private wiki, and I'll talk more about this in just a minute. But one of the things I love about the private wiki is that it's accessible not only to me, but also to my beta readers or to anybody that I want to, to give my login to. So it's just a simple thing. As long as I can pull up a web page, I can pull up my series Bible. The cons to that, of course, are that everything is easily accessible. So if someone were to get a hold of your logins, there would be all of your story information, including potentially like future storylines, right there for people to see. So If you are someone who is nervous about that kind of thing and having it too accessible, you might not want to do a web page based series Bible. It's totally going to depend on your comfort level. And in a similar note there, it would be great if it was something that was difficult to lose. So that's one of the reasons that I like writing in Google Docs or using a private wiki, is because if my computer dies, I'm not going to lose all of my wiki stuff. It needs to be something that can be easily backed up or photocopied or whatever it is, but try to have some kind of redundant copy, or to be keeping it in a place where it's not going to be easily lost, because you don't want to put years of work into a series Bible and then have something happen like a glitch on your computer and your whole Bible is gone. So let's talk about the different methods. And like I said, there are probably a lot more methods even than what I'm going to cover here. So feel free to share different methods that you've used in the comments. One that we've talked about, of course, is a notebook or binder system. So I know there are many authors out there, and this is how I started out, is with a binder system. When you do this, you just need to kind of decide what your organization system is going to be so that you can make it as easily searchable as possible. If it just ends up being a bunch of paper stuffed in a binder, it's going to be very difficult to find the information and the facts you're looking for, and you might as well not have a series Bible anyway. So if you are going to make one that is on paper, just make sure that it's easily searchable and very well organized. There are a couple other AuthorTubers and friends of mine that have videos up here on YouTube about how they are creating their series Bible in a binder. So I'm going to link some of those down below for you as well. I personally moved on from using a binder system to using a private wiki. Now, a wiki, if you think of it as like Wikipedia, right? So this is basically a web-based thing. I don't even know. It's a web-based wiki. I don't know what else to call it. It's not software, but it's just a web-based organization system of files. And what I love so much about using a wiki is the fact that it is super, super easy to set up. You just basically go in and you can create a page for everything you need. And it's super easy to cross-reference and link between pages. So I talked about this on my previous video, so I won't go into it too much here, but one of the things that I love the most, so let's say I want to create one page in my wiki for every character that appears in my story. I can actually create a folder called characters inside a wiki. Then I can have a page dedicated to each character in my story. On that page, I can keep track of everything we know about that character, their appearance, their backstory, any like common knowledge about them, any phrases they often use, their weapons, their magic system, their relationships, and all of those kinds of things that are important to know about those characters. But one of the other things that I can do is if I have a similar folder that's all about the places in this world, so the shops, the towns, the countries, the fantasy worlds, the castles, every little place has its own page as well. What I can do is I can say, you know, Harper lives in the town of Peachville and is sent to live in a place called Shadowford Home for Girls. Well, when I write that out on the page, I can actually link the words Shadowford Home for Girls back to the actual page in the places folder that talks about that home for girls. So it becomes this basically like spider web of information that makes things super easy to research when I'm going through and doing my research and due diligence to make sure things are consistent. Because I can be like, oh, she went to this place, and I can just click on that place and it takes me to a whole page where I'm talking about that place and all the details. And then inside that place, it can be like, and there's a waitress here whose name is Gina and she works at this diner. Then I can click on the diner or the name of the person and I can read all about her history with that diner. And I love that sort of interlocking linking system and that cross-reference system because there's just no other system out there like it. And it's brilliant and it helps so much. Another thing I love about wikis, like I was mentioning earlier, is that it's super easy to search. Once you have all of those pages set up and all of those folders set up inside your wiki, there's a little search box, at least in the one that I use at pbworks.com. I will have it linked down below for you. There's a search box at the top. and you can search for diner, or you can search for Shadowford Home for Girls, and it will pull up every single instance, just like it does when you search Google. It will pull up every time I have written the word Shadowford Home for Girls inside that wiki. So I can see all the instances of that phrase, and I can easily choose and search to see. And that search function is just really hard to beat because it makes it so easy. I don't even have to know where that information is located in my folder system because I've got a search, and I can search for those keywords and terms, and it pulls it right up. It saves me hours of time. I also just love the way that you can arrange things in folders and pages. The organization system of a wiki is really flexible, and I love it. I will also just throw in here too that another really good pro for using a wiki is that it can make things collaborative. Similar to why I love Google Docs, which I've talked about before on this channel. You can collaborate with other people. So if you're writing a series with multiple other authors, you can all have your series Bible and all of your information on that wiki. We did this with my Willow Harbor group when we created that series. All of the facts of the series were right there. So I didn't have to go back through Juliana's series to see what her details were because all of her series information and the shops and the recurring characters were inside the wiki, and it made it so much easier. Plus there was a map to reference and all these other things. Another thing that you can do later too is if you want to make sure that your book is being edited for consistency, is you can have a beta reader go through and search your wiki against the facts in your next book. So if I'm putting out book 11 in my Shadow Demon saga, I could actually tag one of my beta readers and say, hey, I'm going to give you my login to the wiki, and every time you see a fact like somebody's hair color or the color of the seats or this type of necklace or this object that you've seen before, just go in, search, make sure that it's the right color or the right fact. You can pay them to do that or ask them to volunteer to do it, but it might be a good way to just make sure things are consistent, and it gives you that collaborative opportunity. Beyond that, pretty much any place that you can store a bunch of information, you can create a wiki inside of. So here are just a few examples of places or software you could use to create a wiki. So OneNote, Microsoft's OneNote is something I know a lot of people use to create their wikis because you can also do color coding and folders and different things like that. I am not familiar with it, so I'm not going to give you a tutorial, but I'll just let you know that if you go searching, you can probably find some examples of people using OneNote. Evernote is another thing that is commonly used for series wikis or series Bibles. So Evernote might be something you would like to look into. I have heard many people say that they use Scrivener. So if you're not familiar with Scrivener, it is a writing software, and it is something you actually download onto your computer, and you can use it for your writing. But a lot of people will also use Scrivener documents for their series Bible, and they'll put images in and track their story arcs and everything else. So if you have Scrivener, you can use that for your story Bible or your series Bible. You could just do something simple that you already have access to, like using Google Docs. You could also use Word. The capabilities of Google Docs or Word to actually interact with each other and do that cross page linking, though, is not going to be there. So just keep that in mind when you create a Google Doc. It will be searchable, but it might be a lot of information to be keeping in one doc. So if you have like a folder worth of documents, they won't be able to talk to each other the same way a wiki can. So just some pros and cons there as well. A couple other tools that you might want to look into that seem really neat online is World Anvil is one. This is a site that I believe was actually put together for campaigns, for like D&D type campaigns. So gaming, like tabletop gaming and things like that, where people could set up their characters and the rules of the land and the campaigns and all of these things. But I have a friend who uses World Anvil for all of his fantasy stuff, and it became a great place where you can keep track of your maps and your characters and what the races and creatures that you might come upon. So if you're writing a big fantasy world, you might want to check out worldanvil.com, and I will link that for you down below. It's also in your How to Plan and Write a Series workbook from the previous video. Another site that I stumbled upon that I saw some people using for a series Bible type thing, but also seems to have a lot of plotting tools inside, is a website called Hive Word. And in Hive Word, you can track basically the story arcs and the plots of your books and then just kind of plug and play. I, again, have not spent any time really like diving into this, but I will leave a link for you down below if you're interested in kind of looking at another web-based story type tracker that's out there. But like I said, basically anywhere you can store information, be it a binder or something physical, be it a folder in a Google Drive or even just Word or something like that, you can use for a series Bible. But before you really spend a lot of time, and let me tell you, I've spent hours and actually thousands of dollars putting my wiki together because I paid someone else to create some wiki pages for me. You want to make sure that you put some thought into what method you're going to use before you invest that many hours in it, because it's not going to be easy to take a binder and make it into a wiki. It's going to be like starting from scratch. So before you start, really put thought into how you want to do it and how you want to use it so that you make sure you're creating your series Bible in the most helpful place for your individual needs. Okay, so next we're going to talk about what to track in your series Bible. So like I said in the beginning of this video, what you're going to track in your series Bible is the facts of your world. As a surprise bonus for you guys today, if you are on my mailing list or if you join my mailing list, there's a link for you to join down below. I have put a new reference tracking sheet in the HB resource library that is basically just a list of all these things that you can and should track in your series Bible. And we're going to go to it now and talk about all those things that you can track. So let's take a look at another free download that I have for you guys. If you are on my mailing list, this will already be in the HB resource library. If you have not yet joined my mailing list, you can sign up for it through the link down below. I'll have a link to today's blog post where you can go and sign up for it. And I will send you this series Bible checklist as well as last week's how to plan and write your series workbook and a bunch of other resources, how to plot a novel, how to edit a novel. I have a lot of resources and I keep adding to it. So go sign up for that list. Come join us in the community and let's go through this. It is not meant to be completely exhaustive. So there may be other things for your personal story world that you want to track, but there also may be a lot of things on here that you think, okay, I don't need to track that. That's way too detailed. So really, this is a personal system. You need to make some decisions about what your story world is going to depend on. So just think about your own process. And as you finish your first book in the series, when you go back to write book 2, what is going to be important to you? What are you going to need to reference? And if you're thinking about potentially writing a really long series, what 10 books from now are you going to need to remember about books 1 and 2? So give that some thought before you start, because it's a lot harder to go back once you hit book 5 and start tracking characters that you didn't track in the first place. It's so much easier if you do this as you go. So really put some thought into what you're going to track. So I'm hoping this checklist will help you. So one of the first and most important things to track is characters, and this can be every single recurring character in your book, including the side characters. So in your series Bible, list things like hair and eye color, their height, so anything they wear typically or how they look, any distinguishing marks, tattoos, features, commonly used phrases. And when we're talking about commonly used phrases, this could be things that your character uses themselves, like they're always saying gotcha or whatever, or it could be something that is commonly said about your character. So for example, in the Wheel of Time, there's always kind of a funny thing that happens between Matt and Perrin, always thinking that Rand is good with the girls, or Rand always saying that Perrin's good with the girls, and it's just kind of a funny back and forth thing. Or it could be something that everybody thinks this character is intelligent, or everybody thinks this character is sly or slimy or oily or whatever, but any commonly used phrases about your character or by the character. And this can go for features like things that people notice first about your character, or things that people commonly associate with your character, like he always has a certain type of expression on his face. So these are types of things that are important to track. You can also track their relationships, parents, their skills, their backstory, personality, inner and outer desires, like their passions, their personal character arc for each book. And we'll go into this in a template towards the end of this workbook. And don't forget to track your villains too. So you can get as detailed as you want in terms of how many characters. You could track every single character that ever appears in the book, or you could only track the ones that recur the most often. It's up to you, but it can be a good idea to add your villains in there too. Another thing to track is your story arc and book summaries. So I like to create an overall page or section in my series Bible for every single book in the series and the story world. So on this page, for example, you might include a full summary of the book, and you can have the main arc, the subplots, any story threads that are advanced, the character arcs that occur in this book that are important, the villains, the relationship to the overall series arc, how many words that book has, the book cover, any keywords you used when you published it. You could even include links to that book at the various vendors. You could include any type of like blurb that you use or ad copy that you've tried. You can get as detailed as you want here, depending on how you want to use your series Bible. I love to have that overview page for every single book so that when I'm getting ready and preparing to write the next book in the series, I can just briefly run through, all previous 6 books, and they're just getting a refresher of their character arcs, their main story arcs, the villains, the twists, the turns, and things that happened, which is so much faster than going back and reading all 6 books. It gives you that good overview. If you decide to use a color coding system for your stories, this is also a place where you can include that key. Places and the setting of your story is also super important. So this can be, like I say here, as broad as a section for the entire world, like the continents, or, the Cosmere, if you're looking at Brandon Sanderson's stuff, or in my case, the shadow world. So I could have a distinction for the shadow world versus the human world. And then I could get as detailed and specific as Peachville, the town, and then also have a page for the clearing in the woods outside of Shadowford. So you can get as detailed as you want and go as minute as you want, depending on what types of locations or settings recur often in your story. Anything that comes up should be noted, including the description, any identifying terrain or landmarks. You can even make notes here about the culture of a place, any type of commonly seen weather, businesses, and buildings. So here I say, if you mention the trim color on the heroine's house, put it in your series Bible, because these are simple things that could come up when it comes to consistency later. However, this is one of those places when you're talking about tracking things where you could go a little bit too crazy. So if you're writing a romance series, for example, and you mention a lot of things about the heroine's house, but you might never revisit that heroine's house because the next book is going to be about a different heroine, it might not be worth your time to go through and create a detailed series Bible page for the heroine's house, because you're going to only reference it briefly, if at all, in the rest of the series. However, if you're writing a family saga and the estate that they live on is something that comes up in every single book, you're going to want to make detailed notes on where the rooms are, what the style of the house is, what happens in each room, what types of things are mentioned in each room. So really just put some thought into how often these things are going to be mentioned in future books, because your series Bible should primarily be a reference material for you as you're writing subsequent books. Put some good thought into what you'll need to track and do your best to balance the time you spend creating your series Bible against the time it would take you to research this later. This is also a good section to include any maps, even if you're just creating a rough sketch of the inside of the house or the floor plan or the terrain of the country that they're in, that sort of thing. Another thing you might want to track is organizations, culture, and the government in your town or your world. How much of this you track is going to depend heavily on the type of series. So if you're writing a small town romance, you might not have any organizations that are important, like shadowy organizations, and the government might not be that important because it's just the same real world style of government that we have now. However, if you're writing a romance series, the culture might be something that you want to mention. Maybe the entire series is set inside inside a business and the culture of that business is very important. Or maybe you're writing a Southern small town romance where the culture in terms of the events that they have or the types of organizations that they have are reflection of the culture of that town. So that culture is going to be very different than a book set in Chicago in 1920. So you're going to want to track some of that if it keeps coming up. So this can be things like any ruling or mysterious organizations. This could be the rules or laws in your world, the culture, the fashion, any attitude of the ruling government, or the attitude or general music and culture of the times. Just think about the Hunger Games. So think of if she had not tracked how the world works, the way the government is set up, the culture of each district. She would have had to go back to book one so many times checking to see what she had written originally. So this can be something important to your series. Another important thing to track is magic systems and technology. So with all magic systems, there are rules, right? There's consequences to using it, flaws or dangers. Maybe you have to use certain words to cast your magic. When it comes to technology, maybe there are certain things that are governing the ships or the types of weapons that are used, or, think about the Matrix, what is going on with that story world and how the machines are using humans as sort of batteries. So what's really happening here in your world? Be as detailed as you feel you need to be. So this could be referencing any tools that are used, words, important books, ways of gaining knowledge, just basically how does your world work. Consider tracking any objects of significance. This can be an array of things. And again, you don't have to go through your books and pull out every single object that's ever mentioned. However, if there's certain things that keep recurring or coming up, think about in the Marvel series, Marvel Universe, the Tesseract. How many times do we see the Tesseract and how many times does it show up and play a role in the story? So many times. So if nobody was tracking that, then you might have lost track of who's supposed to have it in your timeline and that sort of thing. So these are important things to track as well. So this could be as detailed as a car or a certain box that's used, some kind of totem or a book, like a spell book that's used. So you can add these to the timeline. They can have just a quick note or an entire page. But if you're going to reference it or it's going to recur in your story, I would recommend tracking it. And your tracking page could include an image in terms of what you think this item looks like. Another thing you might want to track is the language or dialect. So this can be something you can just track on each individual character's page or on the culture page of your town, but it could also be something that you'd have your own page to discuss the language or dialect. You can also track separate timelines. This can be as detailed as you want it to be, but it should be something that you track at least on a superficial level. Even with a series that seems to be pretty sequential, or chronological, it can still be important to track timelines. This can be something that you want to keep track of in terms of villains or your character's backstory. Even if you're writing what seems like a contemporary world, not super complicated story, it can be important to track the timelines of when characters meet each other for the first time, or when someone got married versus when someone else met their, future spouse. These things can all be important to know, this happened 2 years ago, or this person left town 5 years ago. And I would love to keep this on an actual chronological timeline. This can take the form of a simple list, or it can be extremely detailed with an entire history of your story world. So make your series Bible work for your own personal story needs. Finally, I highly recommend keeping a style guide in your series Bible. So a style guide is basically a set of standards for how you style the text of your story. So this can mean the way that you capitalize certain organizations or the names of towns. It can mean how you use italics, or it can mean how do you delineate the difference between a dream sequence or a text messaging sequence. Whatever you're using in your story, it's a good idea to create a style guide for how you do this. Now, I have seen style style guides include things about characters too. So your style guide might include just a quick reference to the eye color, hair color, height, and build or whatever of each character. And it can also mean how you use simple phrases or certain things that are tied to each character. So this might not be as detailed as your character page, but it might be just like a quick cheat sheet for referencing. In this quick little PDF that I've created for you, I also have listed out those helpful tips that I have for you that I'm going to go over these in just a minute with you. And then another thing that I have here is a sample character template. And again, this is something that I have just thrown together for you, but you will want to customize it for your own series Bible. But what I recommend is that when you have something that you're tracking a lot of, so characters would be one of them, maybe objects would be another one, or magic system would be another one, to create a template of the things that you want to track about every character or every location, every setting, so that you're super consistent about it. Because if you don't create a template like this, then what's probably going to happen is you're going to create a character for, a page for Jackson, and you might track his hair color and eye color, but you forgot to track his identifying marks or his, common phrases or gestures. And then when you go to reference the material, you can be like, oh, I'm sure I've got his common phrases in there, but you forgot it because you didn't have a template. So this helps you to stay consistent, and it helps to make sure that you track. It's kind of like a prompt to make sure that you track everything you want to track. So this is just some examples of what you might want to do, but I suggest you create the template, and then every time you create a new page for one of your characters, you just simply highlight it, copy it, and paste it into your character's page. That way you have the prompt to enter his eye color, his hair color, his height, and so on. So for your series, you might want to specifically list out siblings or past people that they've dated or their best friends or coworkers, and just make it your own to fit your series. You could put their race, you could put their allegiance if you have a lot of different organizations. If you were writing something like the Hunger Games, you could have their district number here. Any common phrases or gestures that they use, or like I said, things that are said often about them. You can leave a section for when they first appear in your series, any special skills, abilities, or knowledge that they may have. So when it comes to this, if you create a color code for your series, then at the beginning, when we first meet Jackson, maybe the only special skill we know about him is that he can draw the future. So if I had book 1 was color coded in blue, then the text I would write out here to the side would say, can draw the future. And I would write that in blue because I discovered that skill about Jackson in the first book. But let's say I discovered something about Jackson later, or wrote something about Jackson in book 3, where we find out that he can see clearly in the dark. So that's another ability or skill. If book 3 was color coded to be purple, then I would put sees clearly in the dark in purple on my sheet, so that when I'm quickly referencing this, I can see the progression of his abilities in terms of when the reader first discovered them, or when the character himself first discovered them as well, in terms of when they appeared in the novel. So this is really where a color code can help you. You can also summarize their early life, their experiences when they were younger, where they lived, who they dated, what college they went to, whatever's important to your story. You can discuss their wound or their ghost, which we've talked about before. You can tell what this character is most passionate about or what their needs are. But here I have just a brief explanation, is that after this more basic information at the top, you might consider creating a summary below this of every single book that this character appears in. So after you copied this template, you might want to say book 1, Beautiful Demons. We first meet Jackson, blah, 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 and just give a summary of his character arc, what happens in that book, what relationships he establishes, what skills he acquires, and basically what is his role in that first book. Then below that, you would write book 2, Inner Demons, and you would say what happens with Jackson in that book, so that you have not only an overview page of the entire series, of each book in the entire series, but on each character page, you also have a brief summary of that character's journey in each story. Now, like I said before, you might not want to do this much work for every single character, especially if they're not going to be someone who recurs. Another thing you might want to consider when you're creating these character templates and your series Bible is if you have cross-world references. So, for example, since we're talking about my character Jackson from the Shadow Demon Saga, he also makes an appearance in my Sacrifice Me series. So this is something that I would want to note here in the book summary section, is that he appears in this other spinoff. So sort of like Buffy and Angel, which series did they appear in, and where did characters, often cross over to different series? I recommend creating a similar template for any other information you commonly track, like important places, businesses, objects, skills, timelines, maps, anything that you can think of. So hopefully this download helps you establish your own process so that you can be more consistent. I know it's a lot of decisions and sometimes it can feel overwhelming, but again, just remember that this is what you want it to be. I'm giving you a ton of examples, but if your series is not super complex when it comes to a lot of this stuff, then don't worry about making your series Bible super complex. But the work you put into this, especially if you do have a long-running cross-world series, will be paying for itself in the long run, because you'll have this amazing reference material that you can go back to and make sure that your story stays consistent and as tightly written as possible. Okay, so now that we've talked about all the things that you want to track, I'm going to give you some of my top tips for creating a really great series Bible. Number one, identify your priorities right from the start, because my priorities with a multiple world, multiple story, 10 plus book series might be very different from you if you just have a trilogy. My priorities are going to be to have something that links and that I can track lots of different information and put photos in and track a lot of different characters and cross world and stuff like that. But if you're just writing a trilogy and it's very simple and it just features two main characters and a little bit of side stuff, but you're never going to write side stories and all this other information, your priorities probably will be very different from mine. You won't need something quite as complex. So one of the first things you should do is to really identify what type of series, how long you think it's going to be, how complex you want to make your series Bible, and just make a list of like, here are my priorities. Here is how much time I want to put into it. Because when it comes to all things writing, there is no one size fits all method. So you need to decide for yourself what's important to you. Another tip I have for you is to create a template of the common types of things that you're going to be tracking. Once you've created this kind of thing, this kind of template, all you have to do is copy and paste. So when I add a new character to my series, I copy and paste the template, create a new page for them, and I'm ready to roll. Another tip that I have for you is to color code your wiki or your system by book. So if you have, say, 10 books in a series, come up with a 10-book color coding system so that book 1 is always blue and book 2 is always green and book 3 is always purple. Then when you go in and you add text, or you're adding, using a different pen color or however your method is, but like when I go into the wiki and I want to go and change something, I can create text that is purple for anything that I'm adding in on book 3. And then just make sure you have a key somewhere very accessible, like on the home page of your series Bible or in the beginning of your binder, that reminds you of that key, so that when you're flipping through or when you're going through your information, if something is written or highlighted in that purple color, you know that that information came out in book 3. It makes it very visually easy to see where that information came in, where this character first appeared, where these two people finally had their first kiss, what book did that happen in, and so on. So if you have a system that isn't as easy to color code, then what you could do is you could create some other kind of code. Like what I did when I was first creating my wiki is I had a little tag per book. So BD was Beautiful Demons, ID was Inner Demons, Bitter Demons, which is book 3, was BID. I had a kind of abbreviation system for the book so that if I needed to mark which book it happened in, I would use that little code. So come up with some way to distinctively say inside your wiki which book this occurred in, because that can really help you later down the road. Another tip I have for you is to establish the rules and the process for creating your series Bible. So, for example, when I was talking about how you're going to organize your binder, you don't want to just be throwing a bunch of papers in there willy-nilly. It's the same way when you create a wiki or a Word doc. You don't want to just have, well, I have this character pasted next to a town, pasted next to an object, and then there's some magic system stuff over here and some magic system stuff over here. Decide before you get started how you're going to lay out your series Bible. So I'm going to put characters in the front. I'm going to have places over here. I'm going to have the magic system in this section. And how exactly are you going to track it? What are your templates going to be? What type of information are you going to track? So sit down and actually plan out your process and your organization methods, and then stay consistent with it. Again, one of my main tips that I mentioned earlier is don't update your wiki until the book is complete. And I would say those story facts are canon. So don't go through and update your wiki with information that has not been solidified yet. If you just want to have future information in there, like I think this is going to lead to this plot point, then maybe choose, like similarly, a color code or a certain type of system to mark in your wiki that this is information that is not yet set in stone. That way, when you go back to do your research, if you see this thing that says Elena did such and such, you can be like, oh, well, that's written in blue, so maybe that didn't make it into the story because I never finalized it. Have some sort of way to track that. Or do like I do. What I do is when I'm planning, everything goes in my plotting binder. So this is the stuff that isn't yet canon. It isn't yet solidified into the story. This is just the planning. Then I go through, once the book is through the editors, through the beta readers, and it is done and ready to be published, that's when I update my wiki because it's going out to readers. Now it is solid fact in my story world. That's when it gets documented in my series Bible. A final tip that I have for you is do as much as you need to do and track as much as you need to track to make your story writing more efficient and easy to search. But don't keep from writing that next book because you're endlessly updating. Don't allow your series Bible to be another form of procrastination or holding yourself back. That's one of my final tips, because you could spend years going through and creating pages and this whole back end of a spider web of information, but none of it really matters if you're not writing the books and getting them out to readers. So do the minimum you need to do to make your series Bible work for you, and then get back to writing. Okay, in the final section of this video, we're just going to briefly go over how do you actually use your series Bible once it's created. Once you are getting ready to write the next book in your series, what I like to do is go back and reference my series Bible, and I will go into those story summaries and I will read through the summaries of the character and story arcs of the books that came before me. If you don't track this in your series Bible, then you won't use this, but if you have those summaries, they can be really good to getting your mind back focused on where you are in the series. That way you can see what breadcrumbs still have to be carried through, what story questions haven't been answered, and what happened with your characters in the previous books. So it's a great refresher. Then I also will go back through my style sheet or my style guide, and I will refresh my memory on how did I capitalize this? How did I say this particular phrase? Was it italicized? Order of Shadows was capital O, capital S. Shadow Demon, was that capital S, capital D, or lowercase? And you just refresh your style guide on those types of things so that you stay as consistent as possible when you're writing the book, which leaves for less work to do in edits. If, when I'm writing, I come across something that I'm like, I probably need to look that up, I don't always like to stop the flow of words and go search for it. Sometimes I will, but most of the time I don't. I've mentioned this before in my editing video. What I will do is I will mark that section or that piece of text with an XX in the text. So I'll say something like, Jackson stared up at the 3 moons, blah, blah, blah. And then I'll think, were there 3 moons or are there 4 or are there 5? How many moons are in the Shadow Demons? Then I'll put out in parentheses XX in my rough draft, and then I'll just keep writing. Then when I get to either get home and I'm editing for the day, or if I'm just done with the draft, one of the first things that I do is I go through and search my document for XX. And I go in, find all of those instances where I put an XX, and anything there that I can reference or research inside my series Bible, I will research at that point. So if I get to this point where I mention the moons, I'll say, okay, let me open up my series Bible and let me search for shadow world, or let me search for moon, and I will find the answer. Okay, there are 4 moons. They come out at this. Here's the rules of how that works. So this would work in Jackson's case. I will fix my document with the actual facts of the book. That is a really great way to add consistency to your books, but not take you out of the writing by having to like search back through 10 books to find that information. Then finally, like I said, if you are willing to give that password out to a beta reader or someone you even like an editor you pay to read for consistency, then you can also use your series Bible as a fact checker. So this is something that I think is good to get in the habit of doing either yourself or paying or having someone else do for you, especially when you're writing a really long series. Okay, you guys, that is a long and hopefully detailed and helpful overview of how and why you create a series Bible, what types of things you need to track, where you can create your series Bible, and other methods that might help you, and tips and tricks. So I hope you enjoyed this. I would love to show you my detailed series Bible, but there's just too much information in there that I do actually have some future plot ideas that are delineated with italics in my series Bible that I just cannot show it. So plus there's tons of spoilers in there for people that haven't read the book. So I'm not going to show my series Bible, but I will be soon setting up a series Bible for my series, The Witch's Key. When I go to start writing book 2 is when I'm going to set up that series Bible. So if you would like to see a walkthrough of The Witch's Key series Bible, make sure you like this video and comment down below and say, yes, I want to see a walkthrough of The Witch's Key and how you set that up. And I will be glad to do a video for you later this year when I set that fully up. All right, I hope that you enjoyed this. If you did, please sign up for my newsletter, subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and come join us for the rest of these videos. The first 3 videos in this series are live now, so I will include that playlist for you down below. And in our next video, we are going to be talking about tips for publishing and marketing a series. So once your series is starting to be completed and you finish writing it, how do you market it? So we're going to be talking about some best practices with that. So I hope that you'll join me for that next video. Also, if you're interested in publishing strategy and learning how to self-publish, I do have a course that is open right now called Publish and Thrive that walks you through A to Z of how to publish, but also a lot of the mindset and marketing strategy that goes along with being a thriving indie author. I would love for you to join me in that course, as well as my HB90 course, which is a productivity course. You can kind of see this Kanban board over here where I teach you how to set goals and really go after your dream life. So if you would love to join me in that, I have some information and some links down in the description box below. Registration is only open until August 10th, and I only offer this course a couple times a year. So if you're interested, go check out that information and come join us before the doors close on the 10th. All right, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye.